Is Link finally ready to break out of this godforsaken range? Let's discuss. So hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about Link, and do we think that it might actually be able to break out to the upside here? I want to talk a little bit about the short-term prospects of that, and also the medium and long-term outlook for Link as well, talking about what some of our models think about it, and also some fundamental aspects as well. So let's just go ahead and get into this a little bit here. So we can see that Link's price has been pushing up, and we actually put in a higher high relative to July and actually higher relative to April of this year as well. In fact, price has gotten as high as it's been. Really, the last time we've seen prices like this are all the way back in November of 2022. And this is notable change in market structure, where we really, ever since this period, had been putting in lower highs and then even had put in a lower low back here in June of this year. And we're continuing to fail to put in higher highs. Every time we rallied, we'd peak out at a lower point than previous peaks. We've now seen a change in that scenery. We've now actually managed to do that. Now, Link's price has not been able to go ahead and break out of this range. But what's important is that if we go and we flip over and look at Link's market cap, we actually have broken above this range. So just to make things fit in a little bit easier, I'm looking at the 3-day chart for Link. But one of the things I had talked about before was that when you looked at Link's market cap, you could actually see that the range was very symmetrical that we had been in. We had been bouncing off of the same general areas on the lows, and then falling, getting rejected off of the same areas at the highs. Notably, you'll see that this looks different than the price chart where we're just talking about how the highs getting lower. Talk a bit more in a minute about why this is, but really it just has to do with the fact that the amount of supply for Link has increased during this time. And so the market cap will not look exactly the same as price, market cap being the price multiplied by the amount of circulating supply. So one of the things I had talked about before in the past was that what we'd likely see is Link break out of this range in its market cap before we'd see it breaking out with its price. Actually, the way that it's calculated, market cap is calculated, that was basically a necessity. And that perhaps the more important thing to watch for here was a breakout in market cap than in price. And we actually have seen that breakout happen. We have now cleared above this resistance point on market cap, and we're now getting up to higher levels, really highest levels that we've seen since all the way back in May of 2022. And so going forward, something that I think would be really promising to see would be to see the market cap come back down, maybe retest this level at some point and hold it as support, flip it into support before being able to move back to the upside, where maybe we can go ahead and start targeting some of these higher ranges. We might expect some resistance here at around the 6 billion level, but ultimately starting to try to test some of those areas again. And hopefully, if we do manage to flip up above here and come back and hold as support, hopefully that would act as pretty strong support. Oftentimes, if you have an area that's been acting as strong resistance, but then you manage to flip it into support, it can be quite strong there. A lot of people might step in to defend that level. So we'll have to wait and see if that's what plays out. But that's one of the things I'm going to be watching for in the coming days. And I think it is plausible that we might see price have to come back down a little bit and maybe try to retest some of these levels before going back higher. We can see with price, for example, that price has moved up by currently it's up 16.6% on the day, was even higher. We've gotten all the way up to over $9 at the high here. And when you see price rip this extremely, oftentimes there is some consolidation that needs to happen. One of the things we actually look for a sign of this is we go and look at the derivatives market, look at the perpetual futures market. If you're not familiar with that market, it has a mechanism, a part of it that's called the funding rate. And basically the funding rate is, let's say I'm betting long, so I'm betting on the price to go up. Then if the majority of people are long, if longs are the dominant position, then the funding rate is basically a rate that the longs have to pay, and then the shorts get some of that rate, some of that funding rate. And so basically if you see a positive value here, so here in the green, that means that there's a majority longs, or longs are dominant. They are paying fees to the shorts to keep their positions open. Shorts are receiving that fee. Whereas if you see a negative rate, that means that shorts are actually the dominant position. They're actually paying the longs to keep their position open. And the reason I'm showing you this is oftentimes when the funding rate gets too extreme in one direction or the other, it can mark a local top or local bottom. Not to say that it has to be a long-term top or bottom, but at least a point where price might start to stall out a bit and need some time to catch its breath before moving higher. And one of the things you'll notice is that with this big pump that Link has put in, we've seen the funding rate increase, which suggests that a lot of longs have piled in here. And so what could happen is that we might have some chopping around to do for a little bit. Some of those longs might end up getting liquidated, which could bring the price down, some forced selling. And then what you might want to see is a bunch of people then step in on the short side, bet on Link's price really crashing down further, which could then add that fuel for potential short squeeze, where if price then starts to move back up, they could actually end up getting into a position where they're forced to be buying Link that could move price further to the upside. So this is not guaranteed by any means. You can have extreme funding rates that don't really affect price at all, or price continues to move in the same direction. But what it can mean is you just get a sense of where are people positioning themselves. And if we're at a point where people are too positioned on the long side, that can be a situation then where actually the market ends up going against them, liquidating a bunch of them before you can move higher. So we'll have to wait and see. But with a big pump like this, it would not surprise me if we do see some consolidation. And that's again where I'll be watching something like the market cap chart to see, can we flip this zone into support if that happens? And if we do, that would be quite bullish in my opinion. So obviously not financial advice, just one of the things I'm looking at right now. Another thing that we can look at is the Link Bitcoin valuation, or the Link Bitcoin pair. So this is basically denominating the value of Link in Bitcoin instead of dollars. And so basically the way you read this is how many Bitcoin is one Link worth. And what this really is telling you is that in periods where the Link Bitcoin valuation is going up, that means that Link is outperforming Bitcoin, is gaining against Bitcoin. And when it's going down, that's the opposite. That would be a case where Bitcoin is outperforming Link. Now, something I think is useful to look at here, interesting to look at, is that today, not surprisingly, we've had this massive move of Link against Bitcoin, up 15%. So even as Bitcoin has been moving up, Link has massively outperformed it. But more importantly, if we just go back and look since June of this year, Link has actually been in an uptrend against Bitcoin, characterized by higher highs, higher lows, higher high, higher low, so on and so forth. And so that's something that we'd also love to see continue for Link, that even in a situation where Bitcoin itself is already doing pretty well recently, it's rallied back up above 30K today, or it did rally back up above 30K today. If we see Link continuing to outperform Bitcoin, that would be quite a positive sign. It might be just a sign of relative strength of Link, that even in a situation where Bitcoin's doing all right, maybe Link can actually end up doing better. And this is the kind of thing that you like to see going into, let's say we did go into a broader, more bullish phase in the market. Oftentimes it's the assets that start showing strength against Bitcoin that can do especially well. Not always, obviously nothing's guaranteed, but something that I think is useful to keep an eye on. Okay, so now let's talk about what some of our models are thinking about with Link in a little bit of a longer term time horizon. I was talking about more short-term considerations with breaking out of the range, but just to get a broader picture of where Link stands right now. So I'm showing you here is our long-term upside downside potential indicator. It is our risk model, one of our risk models. And long-term, it cares what moves that play out over months to multiple months, so more long-term in its focus. And if you're not familiar, higher values mean higher risk. That's when the upside potential has been largely depleted and there's a lot more downside potential relative to that upside potential. Whereas really low values are the opposite. That's when the downside potential is gotten relatively small and the upside potential is quite high. And what you'll notice about Link is that really all throughout this range, we've been kind of sitting in this general zone for the long-term UDPI, somewhere between roughly -2 going down towards close to the bottom in the deep -4s. We're starting to move up, but what's notable about this is that let's say we do actually manage to break out of this range here and start moving up. What you'll notice is that we have tons of room sitting to the upside, and certainly when you look at past bullish behavior for Link in the past, it spent a lot of its time really sitting above this range. Really, we got up into this range where we're really ranging between around maybe -3 at the lowest end, and then going all the way up to the positives. So up to, for example, into the 2s, up 1.4, so on and so forth. And so what we might end up seeing if we can break out is that there's all this upside potential that the model thinks is plausible for a Link in a longer term time frame, that maybe we actually end up going ahead and realizing some of that. And instead of just coming down and really depleting or going down and really realizing as much downside potential as the model thinks is plausible each dip. Instead, we start behaving more like this, where we're not actually doing that every time. We're ending up kind of going till we build up into something that is bigger, really going in and ultimately then realizing that upside potential, which might set the stage for a deeper correction later on. So we'll have to wait and see. I think the upshot of this chart, what I'm looking at, is that certainly we're not all the way down here. We're not down at negative 4.8. We're also not so high that if we do get a change in the tide and break out of this range, this is still not an unattractive risk level in my estimation. So obviously not financial advice. You should make your own views of the data. But that's one of the things that I'm looking at with Link right now. And another model that we can look at that I think is useful is our forecast model. So this looks at the probability of upside 6 months in the future. So how likely is it that Link's price will be above where it is right now 6 months in the future? And what you'll see is that at the beginning of this godforsaken range, as I've been calling it, the model was quite low. It was not really getting all that confident that Link would be getting above where it was at that point 6 months in the future. But then we really started to flip bullish, and then really going into the more recent weeks, it's been getting extremely bullish, kind of the highest levels that it's been at this whole time, up at around 90% chance of upside in its estimation 6 months in the future. And even with this move up today, it has not fallen off all that much. And so what I'm looking at with this is that the model remains bullish. And what you'll see with this model, so you can see it here with Link, but it also will show this behavior with other assets, is that going into these bullish phases, it tends to get up into this kind of bullish behavior where it might have some volatility move around, but generally speaking, it's going to be bullish on the asset. And then that coincides with these moves up in price. But then it will really get bearish, which is oftentimes that warning that more bleak times are ahead. And that's exactly what we saw going down here through 2022. But now it looks like we might be flipping back into that other behavior. So that's something I think is going to be useful to watch going forward. So important to say 90%, 85%. It's not 100%, certainly, but it's a heck of a lot better than being where we were at 10%, for example. So again, not financial advice, but just one of the things that I'm looking at, one of our models that I'm looking at here also. So if you want to look at these models live for yourself, you can go to our website, polaritydigital.io. And if you sign up for our Polarity Digital Pro subscription service, you can get live access to all these models and more. So again, link in the description if you're interested in checking that out. Okay, so let's go ahead then and talk about just a couple other things here. So one of the things I did just want to mention more on the fundamental side is that one of the things that's really interesting about Link relative to a lot of other altcoins right now is that Link has a lot of narrative hype going around it right now, a lot of positive fundamental developments that are happening with it. And one of the more recent ones that came out here was the DTCC, which, if you're not familiar, it's basically the company that is responsible for the vast majority of settlement for securities. They handle that for basically in the US. They are that central entity that handles a lot of that. And so they handle quadrillions of dollars worth of value in settlement in a given year. And so they, in addition to Swift, have been working with Chainlink to, potentially build out infrastructure around it. Now, obviously, this is so early that most of the potential here is really the hype that this might generate or the narrative this is giving. I think any possibility of this ending up becoming something that creates actual demand for Link through something like DTCC is still probably years away. But we're in a phase of crypto right now where really narratives and speculation are still the main drivers of price. And I think what's more important about this than any of that, or what this could turn out into the future, is that it's a stamp of legitimacy around Link that few other altcoins can muster, can boast of. That Link has this legitimacy that's been given by Swift and now by DTCC amongst others. And so that's something that makes it stand out. And so when we're talking about a market that really is driven by narratives and speculation, then this is something that sets Link up very nicely, where you might see that with that possibility of Link being involved in a system that handles such large volumes of settlement, that looking at a market cap of 5 billion might end up looking relatively cheap if something like that were to pan out. And again, I think it's less about that for Link and more just how Link stands in comparison with a lot of other altcoins, where there are not many other altcoins, really hardly any that I can think of, that could muster similar credentials or at least similar validity or being endorsed in a sense by these entities like the DCC or Swift. That air of legitimacy is not really shared amongst a lot of other altcoins. So that's just another thing that's probably a backdrop to all of this that is important to keep an eye on. So a final point that I wanted to make to kind of, obviously a lot of what I've been talking about has been bullish in light of recent developments, but I do just want to talk about one thing that I think is important for longer term investors to keep an eye on, or just something that is useful to keep in mind. And that is where Link stands with its supply situation. So currently, we're at a place where Link only has about 56% of its total supply in circulation right now. And so that means is that there's going to be quite a lot of Link that ends up hitting the market in the future. That basically the current supply is going to be almost doubled by the time it hits its total supply. And the reason this is important is that can lead to dilution. That as more and more supply hits the market, price is determined by supply and demand. So as more and more supply hits the market, you would expect to need more and more demand to keep price up. And if you want Link to really rip to new all-time highs, that it might just mean that it needs ever increasing amounts of demand to get there if supply continues to increase. This is the circulating supply chart for Link that I'm showing you right here. You just see that it really exploded, really coming off of late 2020, really moving to the upside quite rapidly. And if it continues to do that, it's just something that's important to keep an eye on. And that, by the way, is the reason why we see this discrepancy between market cap and Link's price. That is why we can have Link's price below these levels back through here, then be above those levels from the same points in terms of market cap. That's because supply is larger. Market cap is determined by price times circulating supply. That's why we're seeing this. And the broader point here is just that if Link does get back to the same market cap that acted as its all-time high in the past, around 22.5 billion, that actually would correspond to a lower price for Link than the last time. So instead of Link's price being up at around $50, it would actually be lower because we have a higher amount of circulating supply. You'd actually need to see a larger market cap number for Link for price to get to the same all-time high, and then let alone going to new all-time highs. So I'm not saying that that can't happen. Certainly it can happen. Anything can happen. But just something that's, I think, important to keep an eye on. And just remember that when Link hit its all-time high price in the past, that was in a different supply situation than where it will be in the future. And so to think it'll hit that same point again, you also have to think that more demand will come in that can actually clear it above that point. So that's certainly possible. Just something that I think is important to keep in mind. All right, so that's really what I'm looking at for Link. I think these are exciting developments where we've finally seen, on the market cap at least, Link break out of the range that's been stuck in for well over a year at this point. And I think that there are longer term indicators that suggest that continued bullishness is reasonable, but some other things that are important to keep in mind as well, such as the supply situation. All right, if you like the content or subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates with our indicators and more over there. Check out our website, PolarityDigital.io, for live data from our models and more.